I accept your life and the life of your daughter.
There is a version of Robin Hood you already know. Sherwood Forest, the Merry Men, stolen gold redistributed with a grin. A myth so well worn it barely registers as a story anymore. It's just furniture. You've absorbed it through Disney, through Kevin Costner, through childhood pantomimes. It sits in the culture like something permanent, like it was always true.
Michael Sarnoski doesn't believe it was ever true. His film begins with an old man in the wilderness, caked in blood that isn't all his, dismissing the legend with the bluntness of someone who was there. This Robin Hood, Hugh Jackman, raw-boned and watchful, killed for profit. He kept what he stole. The poor weren't a cause, they were incidental. The stories people tell about him are the stories survivors tell, which is to say, not the whole story. What follows is a film in two halves. The first is brutally, exhaustingly violent. The second is nearly silent, an aging outlaw on a remote island taking refuge in a priory, reckoning with the gap between who he was and who the ballads say he is. It's a film about what folk heroism costs the folk hero, and it doesn't offer him much comfort.
You are a murderous brigand. We were monsters. I am the outlaw. Robin Hood.
The first thing the death of Robin Hood establishes isn't character or plot, it's epistemology. Who gets to say what happened? Robin rejects every flattering account of his own life with the weariness of a man who's heard the lie so many times it's started to sound real even to him. Which raises a question the film keeps circling. What does it do to a person when the story about them is better than they are? For that, you want The Last Kingdom.
Uhtred, you owe me a favor. I call it in now.
If Alfred hears of Christians raiding Cornwall, we will all be killed. He guarantees that outcome.
Leofric, I am a changed man, I swear.
We kill him. He will not be missed.
Uhtred of Bebbanburg spends 7 seasons fighting for an England that will eventually be written as Alfred's, not his. The show is meticulous about this gap between the deeds that happen and the chronicle that gets made of them, between the man who did the thing and the king who gets the credit. Uhtred knows it. He watches history reshape itself around the powerful and flatten everyone else into anecdote.
What The Last Kingdom shares with Sarnoski's film is a specific kind of bitterness about the machinery of legend. Uhtred isn't a villain, he's actually closer to a hero than Robin is in the conventional sense, but the show refuses to let him occupy the story he belongs in. The Danes, the Saxons, the Church, all of them are in the business of producing a usable past. And Uhtred keeps ending up on the wrong side of the draft. His name will be remembered, eventually, just not accurately.
Both works understand that folk heroism is a transaction. Someone with power decides which stories travel. The death of Robin Hood is interested in the man left behind after the transaction is complete. The actual person grinding his teeth at his own mythology, unable to correct the record because the record is too useful to too many people. The Last Kingdom is interested in watching that process happen in real time. Together, they describe the full arc of how a man becomes a symbol and what that costs him.
The priory scenes in The Death of Robin Hood have a deceptive quietness to them, but the violence hasn't stopped, it's just arrived in a different form. Every new face that washes up on that island carries some debt to Robin's past. A boy he blinded, a woman whose family he burned. The killing doesn't end because Robin wants it to end. It ends, or it doesn't, on its own terms. That's the architecture of Blood Meridian.
War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him.
Cormac McCarthy's novel is set in the mid-19th century American Southwest, and it follows a teenager called the Kid across a landscape of industrialized slaughter.
The judge, the novel's terrifying central figure, argues that violence isn't a historical aberration or a human failing, it's the fundamental condition. War is God. The kid's discomfort with that argument is, in the novel's moral logic, not a virtue, but an irrelevance. The connection to Sarnofsky's film isn't superficial. Both works refuse to frame violence as a cycle that can be broken through personal resolve. Robin can't simply decide to stop killing and have that decision stick. The consequences of his past keep arriving, armed. Blood Meridian makes the same structural argument at a cosmic scale. The violence that precedes you is always on its way to meet you. Neither work is nihilistic exactly, but both are unsparing about the idea that goodwill alone can't outrun a long enough history of harm. What McCarthy adds that the film only implies is a philosophical framework for why this is. The judge isn't just a villain, he's a thesis. The death of Robin Hood has a thesis too, embedded in its structure. Each act of violence in Robin's past has generated an avenger who will generate another endlessly. McCarthy would recognize that pattern immediately. He'd also recognize the exhaustion on Robin's face. The kid has that same look. It's the look of someone who understands the argument they're losing. There's a specific register that the death of Robin Hood inhabits in its quieter moments. Something between resignation and readiness. Robin can't stop killing, but he no longer wants to start. He's fast enough still, capable enough. That's the trap. The body knows what to do, even when the mind has decided it shouldn't. Unforgiven knows this trap better than almost any other film.
Hell of a thing, killing a man. You take away all he's got, and all he's ever gonna have.
Clint Eastwood's film follows William Money, a retired outlaw and killer who takes one more job for the money and spends the entire runtime discovering that retired was always provisional. The violence he committed in his younger years was real and specific, not legend, not myth, and the film forces him to confront exactly what it cost the people he hurt. He doesn't get to hide behind a cleaned-up story of himself.
The comparison to the death of Robin Hood is obvious enough that critics made it immediately, but it's worth being precise about where the overlap lives. Both films are about men whose capacity for violence is their defining trait, and both are honest about how that capacity doesn't simply switch off at the point of moral awakening. Money doesn't become peaceful, he becomes temporarily restrained, and then he stops being restrained. Robin is the same. The Priory gives him a pause, not a transformation. Where Unforgiven earns its place here over Logan, the other inevitable comparison, is that Eastwood's film is interested in accountability in a way Logan isn't. The Schofield kid has a crisis of conscience after his first kill. Money doesn't exactly share it, but he doesn't dismiss it either. The film holds the moral weight without resolving it. So does Sarnowski's. These aren't redemption arcs. They're honest tallies. And both films suggest that the most truthful thing an aging killer can do is stop pretending he was something else. The Priory and the death of Robin Hood isn't a backdrop. It's an argument. Robin has spent his entire life in open country, wilderness, battlefields, roads, and the Priory imposes a different set of rules simply by existing. Grace is structural here, not personal. Bridget doesn't offer it because she knows who Robin is. She offers it because offering it is what the Priory does. Of Gods and Men understands that distinction.
Christian, nous ne t'avons pas élu pour décider seul.
Xavier Beauvois's film follows a small community of French Cistercian monks living in rural Algeria in the mid-1990s as violence from the armed Islamic group closes in around them. The monks are not naive. They know what's coming. The film's central question, whether to stay or flee, is really a question about what a vocation asks of a person when the cost becomes concrete. They stay. And Beauvoir films their daily liturgy with the same attention he gives their fear.
The tonal kinship with Sarnoski's film is extraordinary. Both are slow, liturgical, landscape-rooted, morally serious works that refuse easy catharsis. Both use their physical settings, the Algerian Atlas Mountains, the gray Irish coast, as something like moral weather, external conditions that press on the character's choices and give those choices weight. And both are interested in what happens when violence arrives at a place specifically constructed to resist it. Jim Geddes' score for The Death of Robin Hood does something specific. It roots the film in a tradition of British and Irish folk music that has always known grief is geographic, always understood that certain landscapes carry a kind of communal sorrow that outlasts any individual life. That tradition is old, and it has a living practitioner. Richard Dawson has spent his career inside it, and his 2017 album Peasant is its most direct expression. Peasant is a concept album set in the post-Roman British kingdom of Brenaic, roughly 5th to 6th century Northumbria, narrated in sequence by a herald, a weaver, a soldier, a prostitute, a beggar, a shapeshifter. Each song is a life. None of them are easy. Dawson's arrangements draw from traditional English folk, harps, bowed strings, massed voices, but take it somewhere raw and angular, something that sounds less like a museum and more like a wound. The connection to the death of Robin Hood isn't just thematic, though the themes are exact. Medieval Britain, the texture of lives lived under constant threat, the way the landscape absorbs suffering without offering explanation. It's formal. Geddes' score for the film and Dawson's compositions for the album share an approach to folk music as something with mass and weight. Not nostalgia, not pageantry, but a form that has been carrying grief for so long it has adapted around it. Both use the voice as the primary instrument, stripped close to the acoustic, placed against a landscape that doesn't care. Where Dawson extends the conversation is in specificity. His Northumbrian medieval isn't the medieval of Hollywood. No shining armor, no righteous cause. The soldier on the album is tired and afraid. The beggar sells his shoes to buy a chicken for his dying dog. These are the lives history doesn't record, narrated with a tenderness that makes the lack of record feel like the wound it is. Sarnoski's film is doing the same thing to the Robin Hood legend, scraping off the centuries of embellishment and asking what was actually underneath. Dawson, on Peasant, already knows the answer. It's cold and particular and recognizably human. The Death of Robin Hood is interested in one question, really. What happens when the story is kinder than the man? Robin can't answer it. He doesn't live long enough, or change enough, or understand himself well enough. But the film keeps asking it. Which is the point. The ballads always outlast the outlaw.